The fact is we're now, I can't depend on, and we're just waiting on. We are anticipating that Julian will join us, right? Going to be here are here.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead.
Are we ready? I can count us in.
That would be great.
Right. We're going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. Welcome to the October 18th, 2021 Rental Housing Committee meeting. This meeting will begin with agenda item 1, closed session conference with legal counsel to discuss existing legislation. So we're going to a conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, the name of the case. Can I go ahead and proceed into closed session at the moment?
Chair Allman, you do need to see if there's anyone who wants to make any public comment on the items that are on the closed session agenda.
Right. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Andrea?
Yeah, I'm just going to wait just 1 second to give people a chance to raise their hand, and then I'll let you know if I see any. I don't see anyone at this time.
Okay. The closed session is not open to the public. The Rental Housing Committee will rejoin this public meeting using the same Zoom link once the closed session has concluded. Now, are we in closed session or do we have to leave?
No, we have to go to a different link, right, Andrea?
Right. So you're going to use the link that I sent about 5 minutes ago. It's the same link that was in your agenda email earlier this week, last week.
Okay. I hope I can find it. So we all have to reconvene as soon as we're connected on the link.
Yep.
Okay.
Andrea, am I in the right place?
No, if you're
okay, I'll go back to I'll go for another one. Where was the correct invite sent? Or
I just sent another link, I think at 6:56. So you should have
56.
had an email from me.
Joanne should not be on this meeting, Andrea.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Andrea,
just giving some, yeah, I'm just gonna help Matt get over here.
Thank you. Okay, got it. I'll be there in a second.
We're back. I think the committee members are back.
Mhm.
We are.
We're just
Chair
waiting
Almond, you're on mute.
for Patricia.
We're waiting for Patricia.
Right.
Okay.
And while we're waiting for Patricia, I did just want to introduce to the RHC and the public my colleague Nazanin Salehi, who has recently joined our firm and has been helping me with all things CSFRA and will continue to assist.
Thank you and welcome, Naz, if I may call her that.
Yes.
Let me see. I think we have everybody here now. So I'm going to go back to my script. Good evening. Welcome to the October 18, 2021 Rental Housing Committee meeting. The meeting is called to order at 7:22 p.m. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the State of California Government Code Section 54953 due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, due to the coronavirus and the continued recommendation from state and county health officers regarding social distancing. All members of the Rental House Committee are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/RHC_speakers or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering webinar ID 937-7306-8363. Any emails received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the Rental Housing Committee. Emails received after 5 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Now we will proceed with roll call.
We will begin with committee member Grunwald,
Here.
committee member Rosas, who is not here this evening, committee member Ramos,
Present.
committee member Pardo Dizella,
Present.
vice chair Haynes Livesay,
Present.
chair Almond.
Here.
Thank you.
We will now move to agenda item 4, consent calendar. These items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the council to to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Although committee members may remove items, it is generally not intended for the committee to have a lengthy substantive discussion on consent calendar items. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Andrea?
Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Okay. The motion to approve the consent calendar should only include those agenda items that were not pulled for discussion. I will now bring the item back for committee action. A motion to approve the consent calendar should include reading the titles of the agenda items or the resolutions attached to agenda items. A motion to approve should include reading the following items. A motion to approve agenda item 4.1, approve the minutes for September 2021 RHC meeting. A motion to approve agenda item 4.2, approve a resolution making findings regarding continuance of virtual meetings pursuant to the Government Code Section 54953. Do I hear a motion?
I believe we also should take public comment on the consent calendar. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, Susan already asked for comment,
Oh, sorry.
and there was none.
Right.
And I think Committee Member Ramos has her hand raised.
Okay.
So I'll make the motion to approve the consent calendar, including item 4.1, approval of the RHC, approval of the minutes of the RHC meeting September 2021, and item 4.2, adopt a resolution to continue virtual meetings pursuant to Government Code Section 54953.
Is there a second?
May I make a friendly amendment just on the minutes that we do need to update the minutes with regards to the chair's name at the end of the minutes?
Yes. Yes, you may. I noticed that. I noticed that myself.
But if we are okay with that amendment, I would second.
In case people are in the dark, the last item said Chair Ramos instead of saying Chair Almond. So we're just correcting that. Okay. So Andrea, do you want to call the on the motion?
Okay, we'll begin with Committee Member Grunwald.
Aye.
Committee Member Ramos.
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dazella.
Aye.
Vice Chair Haynes Lipsey.
Aye.
Chair Almond.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
We will now open the meeting for oral communication from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on non-agenda items? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Andrea, are there any hands raised?
Sorry there. I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. And we have no appeal hearing, no public hearing. So we're going to go to new business. Acceptance of appeal of decision rate petition 2021-0001. Staff presentation by Karen, I believe.
Is Patricia starting the staff presentation, or am I?
You are.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so the item you have before you is not a formal appeal of a rental housing petition. It is a somewhat new procedure. You have not encountered this before, but under the regulations that you have adopted, there is language that requires that appeal of hearing officer decisions be filed within 10 days of receipt of the hearing officer's decision. but there is also language that allows the RHC to accept late appeals if that would further the interests of justice. So what we have brought before you is a request to accept a late appeal on the petition that was identified. And it is up to you to decide whether to accept or reject the appeal. So, and I do want to just start by, we are not looking at the underlying issues in this petition. All we are looking at is whether there is a reason to allow the appellant in this case, which is the petitioner, to file the appeal late. So just by way of background, this is a tenant petition. It was filed by the tenant in April. It's based on the failure to maintain habitable premise and decrease in housing services. There was an amended petition filed in June, which was accepted shortly after it was filed. And there was a hearing in July. In August, the hearing officer closed the record. And in September, the city sent notice of the decision to all the parties. And just to be clear, that notice was sent by email. That is the method that decisions have been sent to all the parties since the pandemic started. So based on when the decision was sent to the parties, the appeal deadline 10 days later would have been September 21st. The petitioner filed the appeal on September 28th. So staff originally accepted the appeal. In part, the petitioner made certain claims when the appeal was filed that the petition was not mailed to him as the regulations and the appeals form state, and therefore he should have additional time. He also raised issues with the address as to where the appeal was supposed to be filed. So after the city accepted the appeal, the respondents to the petition objected to the acceptance, which is why we have put this on the agenda for you based on your regulations. So we just wanted to, and the staff report gave you a little bit of background on issues that you need to consider. You know, part of this is a due process issue. Was there adequate notice? Were both parties given an opportunity to be heard before a fair and impartial hearing body? So all of those due process rights need to be considered as part of this. And once again, like your appeals hearing, you are acting in a quasi-judicial fashion in this action. So we just want to make sure that we consider everybody's rights. The next slide. So I think I've already gone over this, but anybody can appeal the decision, and the regulations do state that the appeal has to be filed within 10 days. And the RHC can make findings that untimely appeal request is supported by good cause and postponement serves the interest of justice. So that's what the regulations state. In your staff report, we gave you some things you may want to consider in considering this request. One is whether the petitioners received adequate notice of the hearing officer's decision and any consequences of the failure to appeal in a timely manner. Whether the petitioner took ordinary care and prudence to file the appeal in a timely manner. Whether there were any conditions outside of the petitioner's control that prevented the petitioner from timely filing the appeal. Next slide, please. Whether the delay in the filing of the appeal would unfairly prejudice or unduly burden the respondent, and whether granting or denying the late filing would deprive either party of their due process rights. Once again, just as a reminder, we are not looking at the substantive issues in the petition or the likelihood of success on the appeal. So we're really only looking at this very narrow question. And I did just want to suggest we don't really have a procedure in your regulations for this kind of consideration. It is a matter on your agenda that is, any member of the public is entitled to comment. But clearly there are two parties involved here, I think both of whom are present, that have a stake in this matter. So it would be my suggestion that the RHC allow the parties that we handle this sort of kind of like a mini appeal, the way we handle our appeals on petitions, that we take public comments from anybody who's not a party, but then we allow each of the parties to have some period of time. I would not suggest the full 10 minutes, but maybe each could have 5 minutes with a couple minutes of rebuttal, and then it would come back to the RHC for consideration. If you want to handle it that way, I think a motion would be in order, because your rules on procedure don't really address this at all. So it would be good to have a record that that was the RHC's desire. The other option is to just allow everybody their standard 3 minutes, and then you can consider the appeal.
So I want to get the right order of things. We would initially make a motion or go straight to public comment?
I would suggest that you decide procedurally how you want to handle this. If there is a desire to handle it out of the ordinary process, which is every member of the public gets 3 minutes to speak, and that would include the parties to this petition. So if there's a desire to handle it outside of that process, I think a motion would be in order to establish how this would be handled.
Okay. So it's either 3 minutes, which would be within norms, or expand to 5 minutes and make a motion expanding it to 5 minutes.
Yeah, solely for the parties, for 5 minutes for the parties.
Matt, go ahead.
I think Vice Chair was, she had her hand up before I did.
Thank you.
But no, you can go for it.
Oh, okay. Sure. Thank you. I'll make a motion that it would be 3 minutes of public comment for anyone who is not party to the hearing, and then 5 minutes for both the appellant and the respondent, with a 2-minute rebuttal for each, with the appellant speaking first in both cases. If Karen, that adheres to our norms.
Yes, I think that is consistent with how we handle appeals.
Great.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to Committee Member Ramos.
I'm sorry to throw a minor wrench, but I just want to make sure. I see the appellant has their hand raised in the attendee list, but I don't see that the recipient has his hand up, or it could just be maybe that's his lawyer that just raised his hand.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that I didn't want the respondent to not be ready because they didn't know if they had to speak, but it looks like they're ready, so I think we're good.
I think Nicole had a question before we go to the vote.
And we need a second on that motion.
I'll just second the motion.
Okay.
Okay. To roll call vote, we'll start with Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Committee Member Ramos,
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Haynes Livesay,
Aye.
Chair Allman.
Aye.
That motion also passes unanimously.
Okay, so I think at this point you would take public comment from anyone who is not a party.
Yes.
And then we will hear from the parties based on the motion.
Yes. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press 9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Are there any raised hands?
I think the only raised hands are the parties that I'm seeing.
Okay. So then we go to, does it matter whether it's which party starts?
Yeah, so the motion was the appellant would start first. So that would be Mr. Goldstein with 5 minutes, and then the respondent.
Great. Mr. Goldstein, you have the floor.
Thank you for your time, and I understand that the situation has been made more complicated due to COVID, but at the same time, what I'm basically going to say is this. Upon reading the staff report, what I find interesting is that the message that was delivered to me was only a notice of hearing officer written decision and not the actual decision itself. And in fact, what I was clearly saying is that as a general law principle, what they call the inclusion-exclusion principle when it comes to laws and regulations, if a law or regulation includes specific language, in this case, mail, in this case, it's in the appeals to Rental Housing Committee Section 1, Part B, if no party requests an appeal within 10 calendar days after the mailing date of the decision will be considered a final decision. However, I never received any mail at all regarding this decision. I may have gotten the notice of the written decision, but I never got the decision itself mailed to me. And this is basically a significant problem, because I would have figured that the hearing officer would have been well aware of these regulations and would have done their job and timely sent a letter with the decision to me at my physical address. Even though it is considered a little bit more than just being a virtual communication, the real reality is that mail is mail. And so far, there is no modification on either the appeal form or in the regulations that makes any exception to the effect that email is an accepted method of delivery for this situation. If that were to be the case, then what we said it would be that that Part B would have to say the mailing date or email acknowledgement of any sent information. In this case, I don't think I ever submitted any information to the effect that I actually received the actual document. And so all I'm saying is at this point, I know that this is probably the first time this situation has occurred, but in reality, you do know that since I'm not the tenant and I have no lawyer representing me, at this point, you can imagine that if a regular person, I consider myself somewhat intelligent, any normal regular person would have turned around and probably ran into the same situation. They would have turned around and they said, well, wait a minute, this thing says I'm supposed to respond within 10 days of a mail being received. When I don't receive a mail, technically speaking, the dates don't even count, because yes, I got a notice, but the reality is the regulation does not make an exception for electronic communication. And as a most important point, if you looked at the form itself, it had the section for how things are being delivered to parties, and it actually separated the two very clearly. Either you gave it to a person personally, or you give it to them through a physical mail, like I'm suggesting, or you have an email alternative. So that means that there is a clear delineation here. And I understand that in this case, it should not have been anything but common sense for the hearing officer to have made sure that there was a letter sent to me according to his decision. The fact that he did not do so literally put me in a situation where I couldn't do anything other than wait And I basically said to myself, I'll wait for a period of time. In this case, I waited 10 days. And then I said to myself, no, this is not, I'm not getting any mail. And I responded accordingly. The fact that I can clearly say that there was no abuse of delay in this case. Well, if it's been, in this case, within approximately a week of the deadline, that means that if anything else, I was not trying to exploit anything here. I was just trying to make sure that I was following the instructions, and I waited. Thank you.
Okay, and now the respondent, is that what they're called?
Yes.
Okay, 5 minutes on the clock for the respondent. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, committee members. My name is Eric Stevenson. Can you all hear me okay?
I hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Okay. So first, I want to thank Ms. Tiedemann for the staff report. I think that can make it easier for me to address some of these points. Just going through the factors that she had listed, I believe all 5 of those factors weren't here in upholding the decision and denying the appeal in this case. First and foremost, I just want to note that the email that was sent that contained the notice of the hearing officer's decision, it wasn't just the notice, it contained the order itself from the hearing officer. So, and it was both my office as well as Mr. Goldstein that were copied on that same email, so we did receive that. The other thing I want to note is that the CFRA petition for adjustment of rent hearings, and this was Exhibit A that my office provided that hopefully the committee received, but even if they did not, the paragraph 13 for that petition contains an amendment that is in effect during COVID-19 pandemic, which states specifically, and it's highlighted in red, parties are informed that all communications, submissions, and notices shall be sent via email or other electronic means. If a party does not have adequate access to email or other electronic tools, parties are instructed to notify the hearing administrator and alternate arrangements will be made. That same notification was provided in the email, the written notice of the hearing officer's decision on September 10th. At no point did Mr. Goldstein ever indicate that he did not have access to email at any time. He actually doesn't even argue that he didn't receive that email with that order, or with that notice rather. So he has actual notice as well. If you go through the timeline provided by Ms. Tiedemann in the staff report, you can see that every step of the way, the parties were communicating via email with the city was communicating back via email. All communications were in email. All evidence submitted was via email. All the documentation submitted was via email. There's no reason to suspect that the final notice of the written decision would vary from that rule that was put in place during COVID-19, which is that all notices are provided by email. So there's really no reason or no reasonable expectation for Mr. Goldstein to believe that there should be anything following via mail once he got that order emailed to him on September 10th. And again, I think it's important, again, looking at the factors. Did the petitioner receive adequate notice? Yes, he did. He received notice the same time that we did on September 10th. The question, did he take ordinary care and prudence to file the appeal in a timely manner? I would argue, given the notice as part of the initial petition form, the fact that the parties were notified throughout this process that all communications and notices would be via email, I think the fact that he was expecting anything else to now all of a sudden expect the order to be via mail and not via email, I don't think that's reasonable. And the fact that he never responded via email to that or even to ask the question earlier, I don't think is showcasing ordinary care or prudence. I think that there isn't really any conditions outside of his control that would have prevented that. I think, again, throughout this whole process, the party's expectation, the city's own instructions to the parties was that everything would be done via email. And I don't believe there's any other outside conditions that would have affected that. He had the opportunity to submit the appeal via email, and he never did. And, I think another thing to keep in mind is how many other decisions have been made in this way. So for other cases where there's been notice of a hearing officer's decision and informing the parties of that decision, how many other cases do we have where that was provided via email per the CFRA's amendment saying that all these sorts of notices and communications are via email? how many other cases has that occurred in? If we now say that, okay, we do have to actually insist on mailing it, that's what kickstarts the deadline, that sets a precedent that's going to have to affect all of these other cases in which this has happened. So now all of a sudden, parties in these other cases can state that even though all the communications and notices to that point were via email, because they weren't provided with a mailed copy of this particular form, well, now their deadline is extended to appeal indefinitely. And I don't think that's something that is going to serve the interest of justice, certainly. And so with that, I would rest my argument at this time.
Now we'll go to rebuttal by the appealant.
Matt, I think they have 2 minutes.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time. The argument that was made by the attorney here is saying that in other forms, there were instructions saying that things were going to be done only by email. However, unfortunately, if there was an amendment to the regulations, then the regulations would have had to have been modified, and they have not been modified. I sent an email to the RHC showing the link to the regulations that were posted on the CSFRA website, and that has shown that the information was never modified as per the regulations text itself. At the same time, again, the situation with the form that was used for submitting the appeal had not been updated since November of 2018. It should have been updated if there was such an amendment that would have basically provided the appropriate information that would have said clearly that an emailed decision was considered a delivered message. The simple fact is, what's going on is, unfortunately, again, I simply said to myself, I'm going to wait until I get my letter, and unfortunately, it never came. Now, I do not know what's going on with regards to other appeals that have occurred during this time. I'm very open to discovering, has there been appeals that have occurred in this prior to this particular time in which a non-attorney was being expected to read outside the text of forms and outside the text of the regulations. In any case, if the hearing officer failed to send a mail, that's not the petitioner's fault. Thank you.
Okay, and sorry, just to confirm, everyone can hear me still?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay, so first, I just want to point out that petitioner does not actually argue any of the factors brought up in the staff report, and significantly doesn't argue that he actually lacked actual notice, because he didn't. He would receive the email just like we did, that had the notice, that had the copy of the hearing officer's order. And specifically, I want to call to attention the language used by Joanne Pham in that email to the parties that had the written notice and the order attached. It says specifically at the end of this email, kindly confirm receipt of this email as hard copies will not be sent. That was in the email on September 10th. Petitioner is trying to argue that somehow he should have been waiting for a mailed copy of this order to come in when he has a direct statement from the city telling him that hard copies are not going to be sent. So that argument just completely lacks merit. I don't see anything in the CFRA either that would require this sort of vague amendment that he's referring to. But the fact is that the regulations under the CFRA were amended to address this issue during the pandemic. You can see that again, that's part of the CFRA petition for adjustment of rent hearings, paragraph 13 in the Exhibit A that was submitted by our office. It specifically says that these sorts of notices are going to be sent by email. And if the party has a problem with that, they should contact the hearing administrator for alternate arrangements to be made. He didn't do that. And he didn't do so in response to this email where the parties were specifically told that hard copies would not be sent. And again, even on the written notice, it says, this is only going to be by email. The fact is, he had actual notice. I don't know why he waited. It wasn't reasonable for him to do so. It certainly wasn't exercising ordinary care or prudence to wait, especially with this message from the city telling him there wouldn't be any hard copies. And so with that, we would say, he has actual notice and the appeal should be denied for being untimely. Thank you.
Thank you both for your comments. Next, we will go to committee deliberations and provide feedback.
And can I just note one thing? So both of the parties in this case did provide some information in the form of emails, and I just want to note those were forwarded to the RHC. So all of that information has been provided to the RHC.
Great. I'm going to open it up to comments or feedback from the committee. Don't all raise your hands at once.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
And this question would be for Ms. Pham or perhaps anyone else who had access to that inbox. Did the appellant acknowledge receipt of the email on the 10th?
Is that for Karen?
Anyone?
Well, I don't have access to that information. I do see that Joanne Pham is one of the attendees, but I don't know if she has access to check that at this moment.
Okay.
Anki, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I'm going to go look in my email box. Usually I'm copied on these emails. So if you can continue, I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
And Joanne is raising her hand. Yeah, so can we?
Go ahead, Joanne.
So I don't believe I see him, any response from Mr. Goldstein to that email.
Thank you.
Do we have proof that he received it?
Well, I think Mr. Goldstein himself said he did receive it, but he was waiting for the mailed copy.
Right. Thank you. So I just want to clarify that our deliberations at this point are only on a matter of whether or not we will accept that we should be deliberating on the late notice.
Whether the RHC will accept the late appeal. So that is your only subject matter. So if the request for acceptance is supported by good cause and it serves the interest of justice. I think the vice chair has her hand up.
Yeah, so I don't know, in the interest of moving deliberations along, I'd be interested to see what others think on this. I am struggling with the idea of accepting the late petition, the late appeal, because the definition of the word mail based on Merriam-Webster's and what I've been able to find on publicly available electronic dictionaries does include the word email. So I struggle with the idea that an amendment would be needed to utilize electronic delivery in 2021 for communications. I struggle with it further when there were electronic delivery notifications on many communications, albeit not all, but many of the communications. And when it was pretty clearly indicated, at least based on my read, that if someone could not accept electronic delivery, they needed to make that known to the hearing officer. And based on what I understand, that did not occur. So I do struggle with this one. I struggle with the understanding the idea of waiting, because I believe the appellate said that he did wait. He chose to wait after, I believe he stated that he received the email, or he saw that the email had come in, or he had some awareness of the email, and he chose to wait, I believe he said 10 more days, which put him outside of the period of time, if I'm understanding the timeline as it was presented. If one disagrees with a decision, I feel like the prudent behavior would be to not wait, or to call and clarify, or to take some proactive action to verify, am I receiving a physical copy of this? Will a physical copy be coming? The word mail, especially in 2021, tends to have an ambiguous definition. Am I expecting physical mail, post mail, USPS mail, or is this email it? And that's where I guess I struggle with this. So I'd be interested to hear other perspectives.
Committee member Pardo Gisella has his hand up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the vice chair on a lot of that, but, you know, then at the end of the day, I think it's, you know, the key fact is that he had notice. I mean, that's undisputed. If this were a situation where it was unclear that he got all these materials, then I think we have something to talk about. But I think from what I've heard and what I understand, it's undisputed. He got not just a notice of the decision, but the entire decision itself, with an accompanying email that told him that a hard copy was not going to follow. You know, there's a lot of the regs that can be parsed after the fact to try to find a justification for this or that. But I think a reasonable person in this circumstance, when they got an email, which is undisputed, which says, hey, here's a decision, and it's adverse to you, and you know you've got 10 days to do something about it, you're going to jump on that and do something within 10 days. After the fact, you can try to find a reason to explain this away. But I think most people, especially today, as the vice chair said, you really know things are going to come by email. I think all of us have had stuff come from by email, more important even than some of these notice of appeal. I mean, you get things from your doctor, you get all kinds of things now that are electronic, and you expect to get them that way. So, you know, there's in part of our memo, there was a recitation of due process, and that's a consideration we have. And I think that's met here, where it's a notice and an opportunity to be heard. And the appellant had notice of the decision. He had an opportunity to be heard, and he chose not to be heard timely. So I think that's, in my mind, pretty persuasive.
Committee member Ramos has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm a quick thing. In the email that Ms. Span sent to the respondent and the appellant, it said, I'm just confirming that it did tell them that hard copies would not be provided. So please contact, are you confirming? Yes,
Yes, that is what, I'm looking at the email. That is what it said.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, are there any additional comments or feedback any of the committee members want to make at this time?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay. Karen, do we need to make a motion and vote on it?
Yes, so I think you need to make a motion either to accept the late appeal or to reject it.
Okay. Would someone like to create a motion?
Committee member Ramos has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to make the motion to reject the appeal. I think we gave the appellant a chance to reach out if there were any issues. They got adequate notice. I am sensitive. I get worried about some of these things because, like, what if an appellant didn't have the access or did not have the wherewithal to understand the system or whatnot, but the appellant had the opportunity to reach out to our staff, and our staff, we have wonderful staff who are very accessible and very accommodating. So despite how I feel a little concerned about like denying an appeal or accepting an appeal, I feel that they had the opportunity that many people do not have.
Is there a second?
I think Committee Member Pardo Gisella, are you seconding?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay.
Let's start with the roll call vote. We'll begin with Committee Member Grunwald.
Aye.
Committee Member Ramos.
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Gisella.
Aye.
Vice Chair Haynes Loveday.
Aye.
Chair Almond.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Again, thank you both for your time. And at this point, we will proceed to item 9.2, Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance Implementation. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Good evening, Chair Almond and members of the Rental Housing Committee. Yes, it's a fact. Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance has been adopted. And tonight we're going to explain a little bit more in detail what this ordinance contains, and for the Rental Housing Committee to determine what the work plan will be. For background purposes, the City Council did adopt the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance on September 28, and the effective date of this ordinance is going to be October 28, 2021. The MHRSO is our new logo for the ordinance. Provisions and projections are based on the CSFRA with adjustments as needed to reflect the mobile home residency law. And the Rental Housing Committee was granted to implement and administer this ordinance. Just like the CSFRA, the key elements of this ordinance is to protect the mobile home community by stabilizing the rents, by providing eviction protections, in this case for the mobile home tenants, and to ensure a fair rate of return for the park owners. And as mentioned before, the effective date is October the 28th, which is in about a week and a half. So the coverage under this ordinance is for both mobile home owners and mobile home renters. In the case of the mobile home owners, they pay space rent to the mobile home park owner. And in case of the mobile home renters, they pay rent to the mobile home landlord as it is defined in the ordinance. There are a couple of exemptions from the ordinance, and these, the first two lean back to the mobile home residency law. The first one is if there's a lease in effect for a duration of over 12 months. This is no longer applicable for leases that are signed after February the 20th of 2020. And this exemption will be completely abandoned by 2025. The second exemption is if a mobile home is not used as the primary residence by the mobile home owner. And the third exemption is if there is a memorandum of understanding in place as approved by City Council, and at least 80% of a park residents have opted into this MOU. The definition of rent is a little different from the CSFRA as well. It does refine periodic payments for use of a mobile space or the occupancy of a mobile home, as well as the communal's facilities and housing services. But not included are incidental charges, separately billed utility fees, and local government fees and charges. And these non-inclusions refer back to the mobile home residency law. So the base rent has been set at March 16, 2021 in the ordinance. So if a mobile home owner or tenant has moved in before this date, the base rent is considered the rent that was in effect on March 16, 2021. And if someone moved in after that date, the base rent is the initial rent at move-in. So why is this important? The ordinance states that if a rent is charged that is higher than the base rent since March 16, 2021, that overcharged rent needs to be paid back. And starting on October 28 is the effective date, only the base rent can be charged. And AGA's rent increases can only be charged starting on September 1st, 2022. In general, and this is the same as in the CSFRA, rent increases can only be allowed in the following three ways. First is the annual general adjustment of rent, which has been defined being 100% of CPI, with a minimum of 2% and a maximum of 5%. Rent increases can be charged through banked rent increases, which are rent increases that were not previously charged, and maximum has been set at 10% per year, or through an approved petition request for upward adjustment of rent. Then there's vacancy control and rules. The vacancy control part of this ordinance is only applicable for rent space. And vacancy decontrol is in effect for mobile home tenancies. So what does vacancy control mean? That means that upon the start of a new tenancy, the increase is limited to 100% of CPI, unless a legal termination took place that was in compliance with the mobile home residency law, there was an abandonment of a mobile home, or there was a commercial purchaser that replaced the mobile home. And the vacancy decontrol for mobile home tenants means that a mobile home landlord can set an initial rent at market rate. And the petition process follows closely the CSFRA as well. There are 4 reasons why that there is a downward adjustment of rent petition request possible. And there's also the petition for upward adjustment of rent. One, to receive a fair return on investment with the MNOI standard in place, or through a capital improvement pass-through. And the tenant positions can be for rent in excess of the lawful rent, failure to maintain habitable premises, a reduction of communal facilities or housing services, and undue hardship in case of a banked increase or a park owner petition. Well, I just explained this already, so let's move on to the next one. So the fair return on investment is defined as the maintenance of net operating income. And this is exactly the same definition as we are using in the CSFRA. The base year net operating income is adjusted by a percentage change in the CPI between the base year and the most recently published bi-monthly figure as of the date of the submission of the petition. The ordinance is also pretty detailed about capital improvement pass-throughs. This gives an overview of what is allowed for a capital improvement. It should primarily benefit mobile homeowners. It should be a functional improvement. It has a life expectancy of at least 5 years, and it is permanently fixed in place. What is not allowed as a capital improvement pass-through is a routine maintenance of repair or any costs of maintenance and repair as opposed to replacement, or replacement costs due to failure to maintain, or maintenance of improvements to communal facilities, or additions, replacements to bring in compliance with laws. If a capital improvement is approved, the costs need to be amortized. The pass-through cannot exceed 50% of the total costs. This pass-through fee is not considered a rent, and the pass-through is limited to 5% of the base rent. As you can imagine, further regulations need to be deliberated and approved by the Rental Housing Committee to further detail this process. Eviction protections are different for mobile home owners versus mobile home tenants. The mobile home owners are subject to the mobile home residency law, and the protections are listed on this slide. If we look at the next slide, the ordinance provides also eviction protections for mobile home tenants, since they are not covered by the mobile home law. So this is in the local ordinance. These are the same 9 just causes that we see in the CSFRA. And also there's requirement of a notice to cease before a termination notice can be given for a couple, all of these except for failure to pay rent. And the no-fault evictions will become subject to tenant relocation as well. For mobile home tenants, the key takeaways are that there is no longer a no-cause terminations. The cause always needs to be mentioned in termination notices. And even if tenants are at the end of a lease, they do not have to sign a new lease, and an end of a lease is not a valid reason for termination, and expired leases automatically roll over to month-to-month tenancies. So then the Rental Housing Committee is granted with the duties and tasks to implement and enforce this ordinance. So it is upon you, the Rental Housing Committee, to adopt rules and regulations to determine an annual budget and set fees, to set the annual general adjustment of rent and adjudicate petitions. And as we all know, members of the Rental Housing Committee are Mountain View residents appointed by the City Council. The City Council also adopted urgency eviction protection ordinance to protect mobile home tenants from displacement until this ordinance is taking effect on October 28. Furthermore, the City Council also agreed to develop a memorandum of understanding between the city and mobile home park owners, and to amend the tenant relocation assistance ordinance to include mobile home tenants and to include a right to return in cases where mobile homes are taken off the rental market and then returned to the housing market. So tonight, we advised the Rental Housing Committee to adopt a work plan. And we have given you an initial draft of this work plan for the rest of the fiscal year as follows. We would like to suggest that for regulations, we start with the petition and hearing process and adoption of the mandatory registration of the mobile homes. We also provided a communications plan, and part of this plan is already in execution. We're planning on sending postcards, emails. Frequently asked questions have been drafted. A web page is up. A press release is in the works, as well as social media postings. We're planning to organize webinars, office hours. The helpline is available, one-on-one consultations, and to provide contact information for anyone who may have a question regarding this new ordinance. We're also planning to provide templates, forms, and notices for all the procedures that the Rental Housing Committee is going to adopt in their regulations, and to provide all of this communication in English and Spanish and other languages upon request. This is the postcard that is beautifully designed by Patricia, our in-house design person. This will go out in the next week to alert all the mobile home residents that this ordinance is in effect. And if we go to the next page, that our first webinar will take place on November the 3rd in 3 languages. So the questions tonight before the Rental Housing Committee are, if the Rental Housing Committee would like to provide directions to implement a different alternate work plan, and if the Rental Housing Committee would like to provide direction to implement further outreach efforts. This and concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Now we move to questions from committee members. Andrea, can you see any raised hands?
Looks like Vice Chair has a hand raised, and so does Committee Member Ramos after that.
Okay.
My question is just around, and maybe I don't fully understand it, so that's why it's a question. I think there's an AB bill, it's 861, I think, that just passed that says that if a mobile home park rents units beyond 2 put to the side for employees, then the residents may also rent their homes, like they are no longer prohibited from doing so. I don't know exactly what the status is. I think it passed, but it may not have. It may still be like in discussion. But I would imagine that'll have some bearing on our population for purposes of budgeting. So do we know exactly the status of that, and if I'm understanding it properly is the question.
Yeah, I can answer that. So yes, that bill did pass and it was signed by the governor. So what 861 says is that if park owners have a prohibition on renting of the mobile homes in the park, then that prohibition applies to the park owner as well. There are a couple of exceptions. One is the park owner can have up to 2 rentals, and any rentals that were in place as of January 1st, 2022 can continue. So essentially what it's saying is if you prohibit rentals from your tenants who rent spaces from you, then you can't rent yourself. So some parks may have to reconsider their policy against rentals. But in terms of the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance, because the ordinance covers both mobile home spaces and it covers mobile home tenants, if there's an increase in rentals of mobile homes, they're still going to be covered by this ordinance. So I'm not sure that 861 is going to have a big impact on what's covered or not.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
May see a change, but yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Are there other comments from the committee?
I had a question.
That's right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the work plan, is the order, I may not have been reading our staff report correctly, But is the order just a chapters order, or are we looking at other priority items first?
Yes. So I think we would like to start with the petition hearing and petition process, so that part is in place in case a park owner or mobile home residents would like to file a petition, followed by the database mandatory request, so that we have a solid insight into the number of units, both space for space rent or for tenant mobile home rent. And then we work our way through the other regulations, and which follow probably closely all the chapters that we have for the CSFRA. We now have to work through all of them to get them established for the mobile home ordinance.
Thank you.
I found the timeline very easy to read, and it's really a map for the next at least 6 months of work. Is there any other input from the committee?
Remember Greenwald?
Yeah.
I think you're muted.
I was on mute. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. First, just a question in general. Do we have, as I was thinking through my comment, do we have a good way to refer to covered units versus mobile home units? Like, would we say multifamily covered units versus mobile home units?
I think we're going to have to work on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
you mean CSFRA versus the mobile home units? Is that what you're comparing?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay. The reason that came about was it looks as though we have, and maybe not. So I'd like input, but we may have a stub period issue with the rollback plus the first AGA that's allowed. So we had this with the other, let's say, our formerly known as covered units that are not mobile home units. But the intent of the CSFRA, right, is to accrue 100% CPI or account for that on an annual basis. And in this case, written as is, it may be that we're not capturing CPI increase for 7 months prior to, you got a 7-month period from March 2021 to October 2021. And then you've got a year from October 2021 to September 2022, which is where that first adjustment is allowed. So I wonder if we'd have a similar adjustment then to make as we made for the covered units. That doesn't need to be resolved now. I mean, I think that's a question for, we can resolve that once we get there, but just it brought up, we may need terminology to talk about either side. The question I think that is more urgent, once this goes into effect, do we have an understanding for how we're going to account for staff time, communication cost, things of that nature? Because that would go into our calculation for the fee, right?
That's correct. So we need to keep two completely separate books and budgets for the CSFRA and for the mobile home ordinance, including staffing time, everything.
Got it. And would you like input on that, or do you feel like you have a good, that's already accounted for, I guess?
If whatever you like to give to me, please do.
Okay. I think that was the only other question I had based off of the presentation. Could you just explain the exemption for primary residence? How does that extend, or how does that impact tenants who are renting the mobile home? If the owner of the mobile home, if it is not their primary residence, does that mean that anyone who is renting in that mobile home is a roommate?
That depends. Yeah, that depends on if the mobile home owner themselves don't live in the mobile home, then it's not their primary residence. But if you read the ordinance, in that case, the mobile home landlord can charge the fee to the tenant. No.
So,
Mobile home landlord then has to be charged the annual fee.
I see. So the exemption is only for the fee, but not for rent control.
no, so if the mobile home is not occupied by the mobile home owner as its primary residence, then it is exempt from the mobile home space rent control. And that's state law. But if it is rented, then that mobile home owner becomes a mobile home landlord, and the tenant is protected under the ordinance. So this sort of gets to Vice Chair Haynes-Livesey's question about 861, because the way this ordinance works is the space is going to be covered for the most part by the ordinance. It's just who is the landlord is what may change.
I see. Okay. Thank you. That was my last question.
Almond? Your hand up, I'm not sure.
Yes, I meant to have my hand up. So one of my grave concerns is the amount of staff time included, and I include Karen in, or Goldfarb-Littman as contractor, that will be involved in the next 6 to 8 months at least, and that we properly build into the budget a means for covering that. I think it's okay to assume that current staffing will not be enough. They're already taxed to the limit, and this will be another whole layer of workload. So I want us to proceed very carefully in how we designate the budget and staffing. And well, that's my concern. I don't know if whether Anki, you want to comment on that?
So yes, we have to start preparing for a budget for this ordinance, and all the costs that will go into the implementation and administration of this ordinance need to be captured in this budget for sure. And yes, we do need more staffing for the mobile home ordinance.
And especially during the implementation year, it'll be doubly important. Okay. Are there any other hands raised?
Committee Member Ramos?
Yes, back to what staff needs from us, basically approving the work plan, but is there any other needs, like having us write a letter to council to make sure, or are you handling that all on the back end to make sure that you have properly staffed and funded?
Thank you, Emily. Yes, we will definitely have internal meetings with city staff to discuss budgetary requirements. And once we have internally synchronized what is needed and how it needs to be budgeted, we will definitely bring that back to the Rental Housing Committee as soon as possible.
Okay. Andrea, can you confirm whether there's any other hands raised? I apologize. My system doesn't allow me to see it.
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Okay, then it seems like we need a motion.
Public
You want
comment.
to take public
No.
comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I now invite public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press star 9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Andrea? Are there members of the public that want to make comment at this time?
Sorry, I was muted. We do have commenters. I'll start with B. Hansen, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, are you hearing me?
Yes.
I won't waste your time. I am astounded at the amount of work that you've already done and you have yet to do. And I just want to express appreciation for that. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, now I will ask Alex to unmute yourself.
I'm assuming this is Alex Brown.
Correct. I see that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, is it Alex Brown? Yeah. It's been a long time coming. I second Susan's concern about staffing, and I can't wait to see what all of y'all can do with more hands. I know you've been doing yeoman's work with very few people as it stands over the last 2 years, and I think this is a great opportunity, given a slightly larger scope with more funding associated with it, to staff up and get more powerful. Welcome, Nazanin. Good to see you. I know that some of the members of this committee would rather not be doing this at all, but I'd like to thank you anyway for working to protect my neighbors. And I look forward to following all the regulations discussion over the next few months. Thanks.
There are no other hands.
Oh, okay. So next we go to committee deliberations and feedback. If there does not happen to be anyone wanting to make comment at this point, is there a motion to be put on the floor?
We have hands
I'm not sure
raised
that any
by
motion is required on this item. It's more to get feedback.
Okay.
And we have hands raised by committee member Ramos and then committee member Grunwald.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. One piece of feedback on the work plan. If we could get what you have listed as Chapter 10, the just cause for eviction, moved up a little sooner, just to be more mindful of other things that are happening in the world of renting. If you can, I see that there's a lot of bare bones that we need to get done first, but like moving just cause up just a little bit more, as well as you can, would be appreciated.
Okay. Committee member Grunwald.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think regarding my question about accounting and the outreach plan. So I think Anki, one campaign of printed one printed campaign from our budget meeting for covered units, or legacy covered units, as we're going to say. Did it run like $16,000, something around that? And maybe I guess printing costs for this group would be much lower because it's 1,100 units. Yeah. But I think the intent behind my question is, I could see this with, let's say we did have one staff headcount, which everyone from the comments would like to see additional staff. If you just put a round number on staff headcount cost of, let's say, $100,000 annually, split over 1,130 units, that's somewhere, I think, in the $90 range. And then outreach on top of that, and Karen's time, and then hearing officer time, and petitions, things like that. I think the annual fee could start to run up, and I wonder if prior to that, for instance, for their outreach, this is a very tight-knit community. I know they have kind of meetings and probably email communication between one another, and are pretty up to speed on what's happening, since this has been a topic for a while and something they've been asking for. Might we want to back off of like outreach or do email capture for outreach, with one postcard, and then do email capture after that, as opposed to just being more, I guess, a little more conservative on spending that budget between now and when for this ramp up period. Just because I do think everyone values staff time and having additional staff, but maybe not necessarily the other pieces that may take staff time, like multiple mailers, let's say. So just my comment there. And again, for that stub period, I think we would probably want to get that figured out if that wasn't accounted for in the guidance from council. That's all my comments for now.
I did see Vice Chair Hainsley's hand come up, followed by Committee Member Ramos.
So just a couple of comments on the plan and also the expenses and the budget. I think we need to be mindful, of course, of cost, but I'm not necessarily understanding this to be exactly like the CSFRA, where it needs to be self-funding immediately, because I believe in the staff report it said that we can get appropriations from places such as the city to pay for the costs associated with some of the implementation and whatnot. So I'm not sure that we need to be as costs equal fee in the first year or two as we do the ramp up period, as we did necessarily with the CSFRA, where we really needed to make it self-sustaining right away. So I think while it's important to be mindful of the costs, we don't want to say, hey, let's minimize our communication plan because of costs, since there are other pools of money we can tap before we, I totally don't want to see like a per unit fee of, $250 to $350 a year. That does seem a little high, especially compared to what we do for the covered units covered under the CSFRA. But I also don't want to say, hey, we can't hire a full-time headcount because we're worried about the cost. So I would like to dig a little bit more when we do talk about the budget, about the authorization to request and receive funding when and if necessary from any available source, including the city, for the expenses. I think that's going to be important, at least initially, to float the onset. And one thing we probably do need to consider is that we will need to pay for things like translation services. I know it's a later agenda item to talk about translation services with regards to the eviction protection initiative, but we probably do want to make sure that we have the appropriate languages being spoken and being communicated in And then my final comment would be, while it's a closer knit community, or it may be perceived as a closer knit community, I think that we have to be mindful of also the age range may be slightly higher than those in the CSFRA coverage units. So defaulting to email may actually be harder for this population than for just your general populace, if you're thinking about some of the communities were senior communities, things of that nature. So those are just some thoughts that I had, but I like the overall work plan. I actually think it's very well designed. So good job.
Was it committee member Ramos next?
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with the Vice Chair's assessment. It's one of those things where I'm assuming that you are talking in the back channels with the city in regards to funding to make sure that those fees aren't going to go so high, like how we had when we first implemented the CSFRA, where there was the initial funding and we had to pay that back within the first year, which led to the fees being so high. If we could just sprinkle that, and so it just elongates that initial increased cost, I think that would be wonderful. I think the council seems to be, it's the council's program technically, so I'm hoping that they'll be willing to fund that to ensure that the burden is not too much on the park owners when it comes to these fees. I would hold really fast on getting the communication out there via mail, reiterating the Vice Chair's reiterating the Vice Chair's point that there are some senior communities, about 80 to 85% of mobile home park residents are seniors. And email might not be the best way to get to them. I mean, we may be in Silicon Valley and they may have been like the engineer that invented the email. You never know, but it might be helpful to have the an actual notice in the mail. I'm hoping that you might be working with some of the community partners to get things out in what they call the tubes for some door-to-door messaging as well. And that takes volunteer work, so that actually doesn't take a lot of paid time, so that's good. But the goal is to make sure that all the residents in the mobile home parks know about their rights and their protections so that they can stay housed and safe. I would hold fast in making sure that staff has what they need, whether it's the staffing, the funding, the resources that they need in order to implement this program well and easily and without any issues.
Andrea, who's next?
I believe you had a hand, and committee member Grunwald also put his hand up.
I'll let committee member Grunwald go next.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to spur a conversation just about outreach. I don't know the best combo, and I think that some valid concerns have been brought up. I think my point was more in the plan. I think we need an estimate earlier rather than later as to what that fee could look like, with a general assumption about what outreach is going to cost, how much budget we're going to need, and then we also need reserves, right? And then you almost need to work backwards from that, I think, to prioritize how we're going to spend that money. And if you even said $300, so Vice Chair threw out $250 to $300. I do think there should be an understanding of like what would seem punitive to the park owners, and also what happens if there is an MOU and a significant portion of the units are no longer part of the. Are we still charging a fee to units that are covered by an MOU? I would assume not, but again, that's a decision that needs to be made by this group. But I think it's just I think our plan would be affected by having that general budget, right? So I mean, even if we have an assumption like Anki, it's 25% of your time, 25% of everyone's time, plus, you know, some reserves plus something else. I think you could easily get to $300. That would only be $330,000 of the budget for the whole program, and we're running under a $2 million budget or something, right? So for the whatever we want to call the legacy covered units. I guess that's all that I would pull forward is some just like straw man budget based on assumptions. And then you might say, we only have $20,000 for outreach. How are we best going to leverage this money without getting to a fee that the committee sees as punitive for park owners?
I think it's my turn. I would echo the concern about communications. I think the mobile home community is at an advantage at being so well organized within the Mobile Home Alliance. However, I imagine not every mobile home renter or owner is a member of the Alliance. And of course, there's the concern about seniors and even possibly the digital divide, whether they're people who have or don't have computers. The other thing that concerns me is we want to move forward in hopes of creating also an alliance with the park owners. If we say in our implementation year that you need to pay $250 to $350 per unit, they may really react badly, to say the least, and could put some roadblocks in. I think it's very important, as some of the members have said, that we not underestimate our budget items and that we go to the city when we're ready with a really concrete budget, including staff time and all the webinars that will be needed, possibly even stakeholder meetings to be as inclusive as we can, both with the park owners, the landlords, and the renters. We do have the precedent that in the implementation of CSFRA, we borrowed money from the city for that first year and had to pay it back. I think in this case, we're talking about an increased budget because we have a whole new category of residents who will be covered. And aside from just really leeching the owners, we're going to need some financial support from the city. And I'm very happy to hear over and over that there are now good lines of communication on a weekly basis with city staff. So we have a framework in which to negotiate this. And I think our committee should stand in alliance with staff how we want to proceed, and that we proceed sort of judiciously and not rashly come up with a budget we then have to amend. We may have to amend it a year from now. We may need 2 people on staff, or we may need 1 person on staff and contractors during the implementation phase. So I would just like to give the staff the feedback that I think the implementation plan is fantastic. I cannot believe how quickly you came up with a really concrete plan. And you're sort of giving all of us our marching orders, including the attorneys who will have to develop multiple regulations. So that's my bit. Does anybody else have input or comments at this point?
Looks like we have a hand by Vice Chair Haynes-Lipsey and also Run Stabilization staff, Patricia Black.
So for mine, I just wanted to say, I don't think, and we can delve into this more when we get to the budget discussions, which I do think should be early on, because I do think those are important to be early on. I don't, in my mind, this is not a program where we immediately need to fund reserves, because again, since we are not, this is not a self-funding program, it has the flexibility to pull from other funding sources. I don't think we have the need to go as heavy into building a reserve as early as we do with the CSFRA. I think as we go through the discussions, and I do think budget should be on the earlier side so that we can hash out some of the costs and whatnot, and also, you know, get together a proposal to possibly hire staff members, which requires a search process and all of that stuff. I think we just want to keep in mind that not everything in this program needs to be borne by the landlords or by the park owners. It's not needed to say dollar for dollar, every dollar that is spent comes from the park owners' pockets in the way that the CSFRA does. We have more flexibility, and I just want us to keep that in mind as we talk through costs. We don't always need to see it as a zero-sum game here. We have an extra pot of money. It's a rare thing. Take advantage of it. And that's all.
Andrea, who is next?
Tricia Black.
Good evening, committee members. I did want to provide just quick clarification on the costs associated with mailings for the CSFRA, or for that matter, the emergency protection work that we've been doing during COVID. The costs for printing the items are not in any way prohibitive. It is the mailing of the items that is expensive. So with this number of units, we can anticipate that those costs will be significantly reduced. I just wanted to alleviate that concern.
Okay.
Committee member Grunwald has a hand.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, this will be my last comment, but or hopefully, but I think the vice chair makes a good point. I just think kind of pulling forward those assumptions, the earlier we can know that we're going to need to ask for money and how much we're going to be asking for an overage, I think would kind of help us with the plan. Also, just tactically, I guess there isn't a deadline. Maybe that's a question for either Anki or Karen, but what would be, is there a deadline for when, if an MOU is in place, then we will not charge you the fee? Like, when does would our first fee be charged across units? Because again, you know, if 500 units somehow drop out, I mean, that materially changes. Again, maybe not our plan, but we will have to ask groups for, ask the city for money, or trim the budget, or make other adjustments like that. So sorry.
Yeah, so if you follow what we're doing for the CSFRA, we usually charge the annual fees midway through the fiscal year, which is usually in January. In this case, it's not such a huge project every year, because the amount of invoices that need to go out are very limited as we foresee it. So if we can charge them in January, I mean, we can start invoicing as soon as the budget has been finalized and approved. But that's up to the Rental Housing Committee, and I mean, it's not stuck to a certain date in time as we speak.
And if there's an MOU in place, when that fee is assessed and when we would send out the bills, then we would not send the bills out to that park.
We have not discussed that yet, and you have not put regulations out for that.
Got it. So it wouldn't be that. That's not yet part of. That's for the committee to decide. It's not yet part of the guidance.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Got it.
I also want to remind you that having an MOU in place and then getting 80% of all the park residents signing on to this MOU might probably be a longer time frame than 1 year, maybe. So I think we have time to kind of see and get all the basics in place before we probably have to deal with MOU move-overs, if at all.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands at this time.
Okay. So it's my understanding staff wanted input, but do not need a motion at this time. Great. Okay, then I think we can proceed to item 8.3, draft regulations for voluntary agreements to temporarily reduce rent. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Yes, so we brought back into 2020 similar regulations to the Rental Housing Committee when we were talking about voluntary temporary reduction in rent because of the COVID-19. And today we want to bring a similar regulations for you to allow for temporary reductions of rent in case of a major construction or capital improvement situation. And this was given to us because there was a situation in the city of Mountain View where a developer would like to temporarily lower the rents, asked by the city council to temporarily lower the rent while construction is in place.
Okay.
Next slide. So as we explained before, if you look at the CSFRA, it limits rent increases to AGA, and it limits rent increases to 1 per 12 months, and it limits rent increases to 10% per year. So if a landlord were to voluntarily lower the rent temporarily, and that period of time has lapsed, returning the rate to a rent to the prior rate might exceed either an AGA increase or even rent that goes over the 10% per year that is stipulated by the CSFRA. Next, yeah. So the purpose of this regulation is to allow for a developer to temporarily lower the rent and then bring the rent back to the previous AGA, and then being allowed to still charge for the annual AGA where it is feasible. So this is a voluntary short-term agreement, and there are no changes in any other terms of the contract. And upon expiration, the rent can be returned to the prior rent. And it is similar in adopted regulations for the COVID-19 temporarily reduction of rent. So we would like to put in front of the Rental Housing Committee to adopt a resolution for voluntary agreements to temporarily reduce rent. This ends the presentation. If you have any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
Seeing no hands.
Okay. Since there are no more questions, I now invite public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Andrea, do you see any hands raised?
No, I do not see any hands.
Okay. So as it seems like we can then proceed to entertain a motion. Is there someone on the committee that would like to propose a motion to approve a resolution?
Vice Chair Haynes-Livesay has a hand up.
I will motion to approve the resolution of the Rental Housing Committee of Mountain View adopting amendments to Regulation Chapter 7, voluntary agreements to temporarily reduce rent. I actually thought we had already done this and found out that we only limited it to COVID. So let's fix that and adopt this motion. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Matt has seconded it. So Andrea, would you call the roll?
Let's begin with Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Committee Member Ramos,
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dezella,
Aye.
Vice Chair Haynes Livesay,
Aye.
Chair Almond.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we're going to proceed to 8.4, update on eviction prevention program. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you. So I will be giving a presentation on agenda item 8.4. We'll be talking about the eviction prevention program, as well as the role that translation services play in the success of this program. The purpose of this presentation is to receive an informational update on the eviction prevention program and reallocate $10,000 from the $45,000 budgeted legal services for the eviction prevention program to translation services and one-on-one support services for the program. As background, on April 19th of 2021, the committee formalized a multi-pronged eviction prevention program and authorized $45,000 of funding for legal services. The committee requested staff implement the eviction prevention and defense program and incorporated the following services in order to prevent evictions, mitigate potential displacement because of COVID-19 financial impacts, and promote community stability. So the following services were to be provided: a multi-pronged outreach to tenants, landlords, and various community organizations in Mountain View, early intervention informational contact from the city to both tenants and landlords after a termination notice is filed with the city. And staff is sending out informational letters to both tenants and the landlords when we are receiving these termination notices. And the letters are including information about rent assistance, as well as our Mountain View Eviction Help Center. So this program also provides case management services through Project Sentinel and other community-based organizations, landlord and tenant counseling, education and dispute resolution services, as well as full scope legal representation for tenants as they need it. And the program overview: the eviction prevention program connects both tenants and landlords in the city of Mountain View with support services in an effort to reduce evictions related to COVID-19 pandemic. Community members can access information, receive one-on-one support, and connect with services provided by other organizations such as CSA and Project Sentinel. And they can do this at the Eviction Help Center and the pop-up events. And at the Help Center, we are able to connect people with other services and resources, things such as grocery distribution programs, homelessness prevention services, mediation services, among many other. And we have an information desk at the back of the Help Center where we have flyers and brochures for these type of other types of assistance and services. Thank you. The program highlights, and we are going to be looking at this from May 2020, and that's when the city held our first rent assistance pop-up event. So we can see that over this period of time, we've helped 123 households receive one-on-one rent assistance for their application. 7 application assistance and eviction help center clinics have been held. 14 webinars have been hosted. Half of those, or 7 of those, are bilingual, both English and Spanish. And 171 courtesy letters and information packets are mailed to tenants and landlords. These are those letters that are going out after the city receives a copy of the termination notice that was served to the tenant. We're also collecting email addresses now for the termination notice. So we are sending both mail and email packets to the tenants and to the landlords. We've trained over 50 volunteers have been trained in our Train the Trainer events. And we have 7 community organizations that we've partnered with and have participated in this program. And I did want to just sort of mention that staff has realized through this work how effective the one-on-one assistance is when helping the community apply for the rent assistance. And of course, it can be pretty time intensive, but it has been the most effective and very effective way of providing the most thorough assistance to the community. And that work wouldn't really have been possible if it wasn't for our trained and very dedicated volunteers and the city's translations team and our other organizations that we've partnered with, who most of which are able to provide assistance in Spanish, which you'll see the numbers here. So when looking at our clients served, you'll see that 81% actually required assistance in Spanish, and 91% of all our eviction help center clinic clients are requiring some sort of non-English language services. So we've actually had Spanish, of course, some Mandarin and Russian be requested at the Eviction Help Center so far. 100% of the clients are qualified as low income, and actually 81% of those are qualified as extremely low income, which is 30% of the area median income or below. And on an average, the households that we're helping have 3 people in them, and they're living on an income of $27,516 a year. So 96% of clients are requiring assistance with rent and utility relief. 68% need help with their past due rent. 76% are needing help with rent that includes their future rent. 59% are needing assistance paying some sort of utility bill. And 27% are needing help with other expenses. So that could be really a large swath of things, including many households have paid bills on their credit cards during COVID. So there's some assistance for that through CSA. We really just ask them sort of whatever assistance they're requiring and try to plug them into the right program. So again, you can really get a good overview here of sort of who are the people who are coming to the Eviction Help Center, and it really drives home the point of how many are requiring translation services during these events that we're holding. Some outreach highlights. We've had 1 press release go out through the city in 4 languages, the 4 main languages in the city of Mountain View: English, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. 2 news articles were printed about the center. 2 MV Voice advertisements have gone out. We have our webpage in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Chinese, which are all updated frequently. 2 flyers in those same 4 main languages have been widely distributed. So you can see that about 9,000 flyers or so have been printed and distributed to various community leaders, which then go out through our different volunteer systems into the community itself. So again, I think Committee Member Ramos had mentioned a lot of the door-to-door outreach, and they were doing some car flyering that I know was very successful. And we can see that it's successful when we're asking the attendees. We're seeing that 91% of the respondents, those who responded, learned about the services through word of mouth, through another community member or an organization. So that's really good information to have. And we have had 4 social media posts through all the City of Mountain View channels, go out in English and Spanish. Oops, sorry. All right, so looking at the rent relief application assistance events, this was formally launched in May with staff hosting our very first rent relief pop-up event, as well as starting or continuing really the work we were doing with the interactive Zoom webinars. So in total, we've hosted 5 joint in-person events in coordination with CSA and Project Sentinel, as well as some very active community organizations such as the Community in Action Team, or CAT, and the community ambassadors from our Spanish Leadership Academy. And so they've helped people apply for the COVID-19 rent relief, and we educate them about various eviction protections that apply to them at the time of the event. So these were all bilingual, English and Spanish. So that support was provided at each event, and the majority of our community members were in need of that Spanish language support. We varied the locations of these events based on community feedback. We tried different locations at different times based on, what the community thought would work best for them. And so that was pretty successful. We had a nice event at the church just last month as well. Yes. So next we'll look at the actual Eviction Help Center and the information there. So on September 23rd of this year, we actually have our first Eviction Help Center clinic. These clinics are also bilingual, so English and Spanish. Again, majority of the community members who are joining us are Spanish speaking. And we are holding these every Thursday from 1 to 5 o'clock at the City of Mountain View's Public Library on the 2nd floor in the program room. So again, English and Spanish is always going to be there. And we also do provide support in those additional languages when it is requested. And as I mentioned before, we had a few Chinese speaking community members as well as Russian speaking community members join us. So eviction basics and rent relief webinars are scheduled on a bi-weekly basis. We have our landlord focused webinars that are held every other Tuesday. And then we have our tenant focused webinars that are held every other Wednesday, which our tenant focused webinars are always bilingual in English and Spanish. And staff are working with organizations and sort of the city's community services department to schedule additional pop-up events. And we're hoping that those will take place in the coming months. And we have been looking at the possibility of having sort of informational tables at some of the city events, looking maybe at the Monster Bash, I think it's called, in October. And also talking with some representatives from the school districts to see if we can sort of get in there and hold more of the community pop-up events during non-normal business hours. Slide. Legal services, Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto, or better known as CLESPA, and the Stanford Community Law Clinic have agreed to provide pro bono legal services to qualifying community members at the eviction help centers. So they'll either be there every week in person or over a Zoom we have set up for the community members to get legal assistance that way. So CLESPA and the Community Law Clinic started providing this assistance on eviction issues starting September 7th. And we have a schedule with them through the end of the year, at least. We'll see how that goes, but we'll definitely keep you updated. So we do say the need for legal assistance may increase as more termination notices are served to the tenants But it is important to note that the legal services will also require translation services because the majority, again, of our community members who are seeking assistance from the clinic are non-English speaking community members. All right, so the eviction prevention program is robust. And again, like I mentioned, it is time intensive. And the implementation requires multiple staff members from different city departments. And this includes our multicultural engagement program, or MEP, who is the city's translation team. So we rely heavily on them to do this work. We also require multiple community partner organizations and our extensive volunteer network. Again, those who are also able to provide translation services or assistance just directly in Spanish. So that has been very helpful for the implementation of this program. Yes, so I do just want to make note that the majority of the clients are, again, non-native English speakers, and the time that it takes to complete assistance for one family has been averaging about an hour and a half to 2 hours when we go through the entire application process start to finish. And that is including assistance helping the households upload all the necessary documents and sort of navigate their way through those online application processes, because they can be a little bit complicated and tricky if you don't have someone who's done it before helping you. And again, just the City of Mountain View's translation team, MEP, provides the bulk of those translation support at our Thursday Eviction Help Center hours. And it's crucial to the success of the program. We sort of have built in at least five or six translators who come with us every week. And they're able to individually provide assistance in Spanish. And again, just an overview. At this time, we do have CLESPA and the Community Law Clinic who are providing us no-cost legal assistance to those members who are attending the Eviction Help Center. And while staff does anticipate changes in the client's needs towards the legal assistance in the coming months, again, we are currently providing the majority of assistance with the rent assistance application, which at this moment can limit or just entirely eliminate and prevent the eviction from taking place. So we have a lot of weight right now on helping people apply for that rental assistance through the state, as well as some of the City of Mountain View's programs. Additionally, I just wanted to mention that based on the client's demographics, the need for translation support it's not going to go away. So with any of the changes that we might anticipate in the program, with the reliance on rent assistance or the termination notice eviction help, the need for the translation services is always going to be there. And this is the reason why staff is requesting the reallocation of the $10,000 from the funding that was originally approved for legal services, and moving that funding over for translation services and one-to-one support. And just to mention quickly the fiscal impact for this program, reallocating of that $10,000 from the original $45,000 funding that was budgeted for the legal services for the eviction prevention program, and moving that over to translation assistance and one-on-one support will reduce the legal services budget by $10,000 and leaving that with $35,000 in legal services. There would be no other fiscal impact to the budget. So staff is recommending tonight that we reallocate that $10,000 from the $45,000 in funding that was previously approved for legal services for the eviction prevention program, and move that to translation assistance and one-on-one support. And that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Andrea.
I have two hands. Committee member Grunwald and committee member Ramos. You both went up about the same time. You can choose who goes first.
I'll let committee member
go ahead. No. You beat me to it. You beat me to it, my friend.
You're all so polite.
Please go ahead.
Some basic questions. I had the opportunity to see this in action. So largely I'm trying to see if there are ways to make things easier for staff. So the ask is to reallocate 10K from the 45K budget. Would it be easier for staff that we can just say, use that 45K for the eviction prevention program as you see fit? Would that make things easier? Or would that make things harder? I don't want to make things harder. I just want to make things easier.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, that's a great answer to my question. The other question is, do you need us to send a letter to council saying, please fund translation services? Not necessarily for the eviction prevention program, but the fact that a more robust citywide translation services program is beneficial to the entire city, including our program.
Committee member. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so that I guess that was a question, right? Yes, I think the program is expanding quite a bit as we're speaking. And at some point in time, we might need more than just the translation staff. We might have to get people from outside the city. So that's also where part of our request is coming from, because they are very busy and they have a lot of events and other situations to attend to. So we don't want to just be solely dependent on the translation staff, but also be able to operate with enough people, no matter where that staff is located or what their obligations are at some point in time.
That was all my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Grunwald has a hand.
Sure, thank you. To Emily, to committee member Ramos's last point, I am somewhat concerned about the blending. So this is also a city program. I think we put in $45,000. The city put in $45,000, or maybe more. I can't remember from that agenda item. But it was originally intended specifically for, I believe, legal counsel when an eviction has been served, and to defend that person in court, because, and I think the rationale was typically, a lot of these tenants don't have legal representation. And so I think that was what the pilot was intended to do. And now this ask, again, let's get the people the services, but it's almost an accounting issue for me of now it's filling out rent relief applications, which I believe, wouldn't Project Sentinel do that if someone called into the number? Would they help them fill out everything they need to fill out? And then when they have translation services as part of that? Or am I mistaken?
Project Sentinel is a partner with the state's rent assistance program. However, the City of Mountain View and our Eviction Help Center are the only people who are providing in-person support, which we have realized has been severely lacking and is very important for the community that we're serving, who are not always very computer literate, and one-on-one in-person support is what they really require in order to be successful in applying for the rent assistance. Also, which I sort of touched on in the presentation, is that at this moment in time, applying for rent assistance really is a form of eviction prevention and defense at this moment, as there are the eviction protections in place, that there will be no evictions unless the tenant has tried to apply for rent assistance and the landlord has tried to apply for rent assistance and participate in the tenant's application. So just by simply doing the application work, it is sort of preventing the next step of the tenant needing the legal services. However, that could change in the coming months, but that's one way to look at it at this point. But yes, Project Sentinel will provide some of that help over Zoom only.
Thank you. And did we use all of our Project Sentinel and that line item budget over the last year?
That's
the last time we assessed that.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of personnel changes at Project Sentinel. That's a different topic, but at the moment we do use 2 of their staff at the Eviction Help Center. So they do help at the Eviction Help Center right now.
Thanks, Anki. Sorry, the question was just, did we, from what we budgeted last time for that line item of Project Sentinel, Helpline, all of that, did we have any left over, or do we expect to have any left over this coming fiscal?
That's really, really hard to predict at this moment in time, where we're just 2-3 months into the fiscal year.
But
thank you.
With Project Sentinel and their helping people with rental assistance, that is through their partnership with the state, and they're receiving money through the state for providing those services and being a partner for that program.
Thank you.
Chair Almond?
I think it's come to my attention that we may be the only city in the state of California offering these kind of eviction services. And I think it's kind of like a startup program. And in the back of our minds, we do know that the city council allocated $50,000, but I don't believe any of that has been invoiced or come to help. So I just wanted to comment on that. Are there any other comments at this point?
Vice Chair Haynes-Lipsey?
Are we doing comments or are we only doing questions? Are comments okay?
I thought we had to go to public comment first.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
I will hold my comment then.
Okay. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press 9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen.
Okay, I will ask Alex Brown to unmute.
Al, the purpose of the CSFRA is to promote neighborhood and community stability, healthy housing, and affordability. It's not to make numbers small and do less. Matt, if all you care about is numbers, and what are you doing here? But also, if you're going to try and complain about spending money and staff time to help people stay housed, could you at least pay attention to the presentations and not keep asking questions that were covered moments before? Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, so now we will go into committee deliberations and provide feedback.
Now, can I make my comments?
Yes,
okay.
You may.
Okay. So first and foremost, on the accounting concern of are we taking money out of I think the accounting concern, if I understood it properly, is we're taking money out of a bucket that we called legal dollars, and we're potentially moving them over to administrative dollars. And is that a commingling of funds that we can live with? I think that was the accounting concern. I will say, as a person who regularly deals with paperwork is challenging for lots of people to get it right. So when it is in your non-native language and you are attempting to fill it out and potentially under stress, potentially having not dealt with some of the terms that are used in legalese and in legal jargon, having the guidance of someone who can walk you through it is quasi-legal help in my view. I don't want to go into a whole treatise on this, but I believe that when they sign the documents, they're making a legal attestation. So I do believe that services to support completing the paperwork to get the rent relief money would be considered legal, even if it has administrative undertones. I think it would still fall in the right bucket. So I don't think it's a complete commingling of legal money over to administrative dollars, if I think that was the original concern of our committee. That's it.
See hands from Committee Member Ramos, followed by Committee Member Grunwald.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you guys hear me? Okay, you guys can hear me. Starting with commentary, I actually had the privilege or wherewithal or fun learning of visiting the Eviction Help Center this past Thursday. It was wonderful. Tiny room, but overall wonderful. From hearing the clients, I didn't speak directly to the clients, but I kind of just wandered around and heard the ambient conversations in place. And at the time I visited, every single one of them was speaking, had some form of translation happening. So I do see the incredibly strong need of getting some translation services available. I have been able to see throughout the county how they are dealing with these eviction prevention services. Mountain View isn't the only one. San Jose also has an eviction help center that is, they actually, I think they have two and they're looking at a third site as well. But San Jose is also 10 times the size of Mountain View and then some. So I actually view it as something that's a very proud thing for our city, that we have been dedicating these kinds of resources to help people stay in their homes. And the eviction help centers aren't just there to help tenants. They're actually also there to help landlords as well. And I have been able to learn about how some difficulties landlords were having with their not evictions, but their rent relief applications, because it actually takes both of them to actually make it work. And this is an application that is run by the state that government is not known to make paperwork easy, unfortunately. And the resources that have been given, that have been set aside by our city and partially through our staff, who I really can't say enough how wonderful that they are. I'm in some meetings where they are talking about, oh, and then Mountain View did this and Mountain View did that. And all the other cities are looking at them with so much envy, wishing that they can do the same for their residents. So the things that I am looking for on this item is ways to make this easier for our staff to continue doing the great work that they are doing. So instead of the recommendation, I am inclined to we can do a recommendation, but also I would be inclined to allow the rest of that funding to be approved for the eviction prevention program as staff sees fit, rather than having to come for each bit new thing they need to make this program work. I don't know if you want me to make the motion for that. The other thing I would like, so I actually might need some help to make that motion. The other thing I would like is to send something to the city to let them know that we would love a more robust translation services program, not just for our needs, but for the needs of our entire city. And see if we could work on that as well. It could be a light ask. I'm not in the habit of demanding things from council, but it would be nice to just put that in their ear that these are needs that we're hoping that the city can fill as well. I mean, we'd also take as much money from them as they would like to give us for eviction prevention because it serves the whole city. But I also do believe that it serves the mission of the CSFRA as well in terms of keeping people housed. With that, I'll make a motion, and then we can pass it over to Committee Member Grunwald, who I hope will second it. But I would make a motion to reallocate the $10,000 from the $10,000 from the $45,000 funding previously approved for legal services for eviction prevention program to translation assistance and one-on-one support, and to reallocate the additional $35K for the eviction prevention program for services as staff sees fit. And I don't know if you want me to chain this motion or like one giant motion or go to a second motion after we deal with this one. But I'll just chain it and send a letter to the City Council in support of expanding translation services for city services and include the needs of our committee and the eviction prevention program. I think that works. And I think that's my motion. Thank you.
You're on mute, Andrea.
Sorry. We have the hand by Committee Member Grunwald.
Sure, thank you. First and foremost, I think absolutely everyone who needs translation help filling out any form to receive assistance that's allowed by the state should get that help for sure. Again, I just think it's this committee is measured on how much of a fee we charge as one of the outputs of or one of the metrics that we're measured on. And this is something that does benefit the city at large. And I think we had an original intent that this money would be used for the purpose that we set out. And that we were going to track, and do a postmortem perhaps on how often were covered units, was it somebody who was in a covered unit, and how successful, when we gave legal help, how successful were we in overturning those evictions? I mean, that was my interpretation of when the pilot program was put into effect. That is something that we would evaluate at the end. So, $10,000 is kind of inconsequential, but I do think it's important for the committee to, really think about the services that we're providing and how that's being charged, because this is all coming out of a pool that's just for landlords for this program, as opposed to the city, which, landlords are also paying property taxes, and everyone's paying property taxes that go into a large pool, which is much bigger than our pool. And when we, add services, then that goes directly, it's just split up by a certain number of units, and that's the number that's charged there. So that's it, is just to think about that. And yeah, if we, the CSFRA also has limitations, right? So if folks who need the translation services are in single family homes, that is more into the jurisdiction of the city, right? So if we are sharing this program with them and they're also putting funds in, maybe there could be some sort of chargeback where we're just recording what kind of units the folks are in, what kind of help is being needed. And if we do have, perhaps if we have Project Sentinel folks on site who are providing the services, they could just charge it to our Project Sentinel line item in the budget. Because right now, as it is, this then will be assessed as another $10,000 that gets, this is incremental on top of what our budget was prior to when we put this pilot program into place, I think. It was part of our last budget, but it was an incremental program that was added on that as a pilot. So otherwise, then when we go to evaluate the $10,000 or the $45,000, we could either pull that back or keep that. But maybe Anki, sorry, it looks like you want to say something.
No, I'm trying to follow you. But the $10,000 for translations is also part of the pilot project, and we don't know where we are at with this project once March 2022 comes around. So it's definitely a one-year pilot project.
Okay. I guess my alternate proposal to Chair or Committee Member Ramos is, I guess, how are you intending to ask the city for help or collaboration on this?
Actually, what I would like to clarify here as well is that the city also made funds available for the Eviction Prevention and Defense program in the amount of $50,000. And we're equally going to see if we can get approval to use also $10,000 of those funds for our immediate translation and one-on-one support. So that's already in the works.
I could provide a response to Matthew's committee member Grunwald's question. I was just going to send a letter. I was largely looking at focusing on translation services at that in that manner, asking the city to expand the citywide translation services, because it's one of those things that hopefully that we can pull from, and it's a much more stabler resource in terms of, instead of using CSFRA funds for that, which I'm hoping you're supportive of. But what I'm hoping to do with the $45K of legal funding that we set aside was essentially, the goal of it was to prevent evictions related to COVID as we face this eviction cliff. A lot of people have been thinking that once September 30th roll around, we would suddenly see like this falling cliff of like all these people losing their homes, and it kept me up at night. But what we're probably seeing more is a trickle, but the trickle just doesn't stop. I believe when I visited this past Thursday, the first two help center times on the 30th, and then early in October, the first Thursday in October, it was mostly about rent relief assistance. And I don't think, staff can correct me, they didn't have questions about evictions quite yet. It was everyone just rolling in with help for the rent relief program. But the day I came, that's when people started talking to legal representatives, showing up with 3-day notices. Not quite. My understanding is that we have not seen the unlawful detainer yet. But it worries me that I want to make sure our staff is ready for whatever comes with the eviction prevention program. And that's why I wanted the flexible funding with the 45K with the translation, the 10K for the translation service, and just asking in general the city beef up the translation services if they should they be deciding that anytime soon. Although I do agree with Committee Member Grunwald's ask about seeing the results of some of that funding. Perhaps staff could also include stats from the clinics in the monthly report, or have a separate agenda item for it. I don't mind either way. Love to see those stats. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Maybe if I could respond quickly, because I know there's other hands up, but I guess the confusion for me just comes in that I thought anybody could call into the helpline for any reason and just get help, and that they had translation. If you called into the helpline, you'd get translation services with that help if you had a question and not in English. And that we couldn't, the pilot program was because we couldn't take that then to the next step of like providing legal defense for someone, but we could help someone like fill out an application. But maybe I'm mistaken as to where like an inbound request stops and we can no longer under Project Sentinel provide assistance.
Yeah, so
maybe that's my confusion.
Yeah, so I think we also had no clear picture of how this help center was going to work. When we asked for the money in April, what we are now seeing is that the laws have changed in California, where a new law has been adopted where it says, as long as you apply for rent relief and that application is pending, the UD process is being stayed. So it's a very direct defense for tenants while they're getting approved for their applications and while they're still waiting for the money to give to the landlord, whatever it is that they're owing, that the eviction gets stayed until everybody gets paid, and then the landlord can dismiss the UD court filings. So it is all very legally related, although when we first saw what kind of legal action we were thinking we needed was a little bit different at the time when we explained it to you. So, but there's also some legal steps that tenants need to take in order to have their UD process stayed. And that's where legal comes in to help them file this request for a stay, to notify the landlord that an application has been filed. So it's all part of the legal defense of a tenant. So did we foresee that that was going to be part of the legal work? No, we did not. But it is now. So, and then the majority of the work for legal department is also to look at these termination notices and to see if these new laws that have been adopted are followed to the letter. And these requirements have been changed quite a few times over the past few months. So it's a quite of detailed work to look at each of these termination notices to see if all the different requirements for all the different periods of time have been complied with. And that is not something that Project Sentinel all can do themselves. This is where we now use our legal support for. And again, for them to give that legal support, they need the translators because majority of the clients speak Spanish.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to belabor the point. I get maybe one last question, and then that will be the last. I guess once interpreting the laws, and I mean laws will continue to change for sure. And And we are focusing everyone on calling into the helpline in most cases, right? So will we need an in-person component going forward, even after this particular set of laws or the moratoriums are kind of, things get processed through and there's no longer, hopefully we're in a post-COVID world. Would the helpline still provide that interpretation, those services, or is that not the case?
So we're talking about two different things right now. The helpline is like a phone number where people can call in to ask for landlord-tenant related questions. On Thursdays, we have the Eviction Help Center, which is an in-person clinic where people come with their termination notices, with other questions related to evictions and the eviction moratorium ending last month, and where we can provide them next steps to do in order for them to prevent being evicted. So that's a very specialized type of help that we're providing in the in-person clinics. We also noticed that people cannot get across their needs over the phone. They all come to the library to get help. They give us the notice, they give us what they need, and we have to do intensive one-on-one counseling with these people to actually get them to the next steps so that they will not get evicted.
Do we also do that for like upward adjustment of rents though? I mean, that someone would be able to say, I need to get this filled out, and we would still help them translate that form and get that submitted.
We also do that, yes. So we were not doing a lot of in-person because of the COVID, but we have the office hours, but this is specifically, these clinics are specifically for eviction prevention due to COVID. And that's what these funds were for.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the patience.
Chair Almond, followed by Vice Chair Haynes-Lister.
Okay, I wanted to first thank Emily for the information and education that, in fact, San Jose is providing help clinics. It's great. The other thing is I think we might need a friendly amendment, because for the phrase "to use the money as they see fit" seems to me a little. I would like advice on that from Karen or Anki. It seems like there might be a more legal way of putting that.
Well, there's two pieces of advice. First of all, the motion hasn't been seconded, so an amendment is only appropriate after a second. So if maybe there is a second, we can then address tweaking the language.
I believe you're on mute.
Do I hear a second?
Nicole has a hand up. I don't know if it's for a comment or for a second.
It's not for a second. I would want to tweak.
But my understanding is we can only tweak after we have a second.
Well, I mean, if there's no second, then you can make another motion.
Yes.
The motion fails for lack of a second.
No second. I see no hands for a second.
Okay, the motion fails. We need a new motion.
I do have a new motion.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I can appreciate concern around completely unrestricting the 45,000 away from legal services. I do think when we initially talked about this program, we did talk about trying to do sort of a boilerplate case and trying to make sure that we could do quantity and repeatability, some of which, if we unrestrict too much, we could lose the ability to do down the road, which right now we have the ability to stay the UD process by having the application go in and be pending. For those whose applications are not accepted, I think we do want to be mindful of the fact that if they're not accepted for reasons that perhaps there could be cause to prevent the UD, we don't want to not have the money. We don't want to give up the money to have those types of cases done. So my motion would be to unrestrict 15,000 of the 45,000, which could be used for translation assistance, one-on-one support, and other unrestricted needs associated with the eviction prevention program, and to keep the other 30,000 at this time still restricted for legal services. I think that given that it is a 5-month period since May that this has been running, and right now pro bono assistance is being provided, but that doesn't mean it will forever be that way. I think that might be a happy compromise where we unrestrict 15, but we keep the other 30 restricted just for now. And we can always have this come back to us. It's not as staff friendly as restricting the whole pot, but it might be sensitive to the concerns around budget creep. So that is my motion, to unrestrict the 15.
So do we have a distinct motion there? It's to
yes. The motion would be to unrestrict $15,000 of the $45,000 funding previously approved for legal services for the eviction prevention program, unrestricted for such purposes as translation assistance and one-on-one support, but also other needs of the eviction prevention program as determined by staff.
Here's my concern. If we've billed out $10,000 worth of translation services and we need another $1 or another something, then staff has to come back to the committee to reallocate more funding for translation.
That is correct. I said 15. So
I think we will be very happy with the 15, really.
And I think that we need a second before we start discussing the motion.
Is there a second?
I'm willing to second the motion.
Ramos?
I'm willing to second that motion. I do have some tweaks though afterwards.
So we now have a motion seconded. I have a technical question. Do we need to vote, or can we can still deliberate at this point, right?
Yes, okay. You can still discuss, and it sounds like people have amendments.
Yes.
Committee Member Ramos and Committee Member Grunwald have their hands up.
Okay. Committee Member Ramos.
One tweak is the addressing council in regards to the translation services on a whole level. Did you want to put that in this motion, or did you want to change to get another motion to deal with that? Which
I was going slim, 2 motions.
Fine. Okay, I'm good with that. If staff can work with that, then I can work with that.
Committee Member Grunwald?
Yeah, just quickly, I guess, Anki, is there any way we could authorize just tapping into any line item that we have in the existing budget, and that's for translation services in general? I mean, for our outreach, we use translation services on many line items that we have. and then even keeping the whole $45,000 for this pilot program. I'm just looking to keep it from a pure accounting standpoint, that this is, to its original intent, I guess, and the translation services that they're needed. I guess, can we pull them out of any other existing line item? If not, then I'm supportive of the motion, and we'll just go from there.
And that's going, so for starters, this is all for the Eviction Prevention and Defense Program. So this is all, this 45,000 is all for this pilot program. So it is not, so I guess I'm not understanding your question, because it is all for the pilot program.
I guess in my mind, when someone calls in, we need translation to figure out what their problem is, and then to help them get to a point of resolution in general with any kind of rent or rent stabilization issue that they're going to call in about. So I guess I'm just confused as to why specifically we don't have the flexibility to just say this is a translation issue, and then the original intent again of like defending against UDs, I believe my interpretation was in court, but yeah, just more like why not just have it in the general one-to-one budgetary item of helping anyone figure out what their options are. Seems like we already have a significant portion of our budget allocated to that.
So we can allocate it to any other index code in the whole budget, but that does not make a lot of sense to be able to show at the end of the year where all the money would be going. So I felt it's more clear and more clean to keep all the costs for the eviction prevention program into one allocated sub-budget.
Staff would like to provide a little bit of additional clarification on the difference in the helpline numbers for translation support services and what we're seeing in the eviction help centers. The helpline numbers and all of the people that call into either our offices or through the helpline, that's averaging about 30% needing translation support this year. Usually it's about 20%. At these clinics and at the pop-up events that were happening before, it averaged 81%, and at the clinics it's 91%. It's nearly everybody who's coming in to receive these services that are needing this help. And it's not just one phone call at a time, it's a gross number of people that are here receiving help at once. So that's where the major difference in the type of support that's being provided is happening. So unlike with a phone call where people are receiving help for a relatively limited amount of time, usually under 15 minutes, we're now helping people with substantial amounts of time and a lot of people all at once. And that's why there's more of a need than what the helpline can provide.
I won't belabor the point, I guess. I will do offline research to figure out where our services for the helpline stop. And that will help me understand, I think, when additional specific budget is warranted. So I will be supportive of the motion as it has been said.
Chair Almond, you have your hand up.
Forgive me, I have totally forgotten what I was going to say. Let me just take a look. Oh yes, our pro bono services. Does the Stanford Law Clinic and who's the other one? Do they have CLESPA? Do they both have translators available?
No. So and I can also provide. They have a couple of people available, and it is what Patricia said. If there's 10 people coming at the same time, having one Project Sentinel person that may or may not be able to speak Spanish is just not enough. And so same with the legal support that we're getting. We're getting maybe 2 or maybe 3 people in, or sometimes 1, and they need translation. And in the meantime, there's 8 other people there also needing help. So it is also the bombardment of the amount of people that are coming to us needing those services that need to be covered. And we want to help everybody that comes in, because once they're in the door, we can help them, and we want to help them from A to Z and not send them back away and say, go call a number. Because we do know then that half the people will not call that number or will not get the services that they need or get an answering machine. And then we lost one opportunity to help a household.
Those are good points. And the volunteers that we have that are able to translate, do we have a consistent number on that?
Those are, they are very helpful, and they really come to the clinic as often as they can, but we cannot count them. We cannot say, oh, we know for sure we have 10 people helping today in the clinic.
Yeah, that was my point.
We have noticed we have more volunteers when we hold events that are not during regular business hours, because the majority of our volunteers are having other responsibilities such as work or children that they have to attend to.
Okay. Are there any other concerns?
Seeing no hands.
Can someone restate the motion?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Karen can do that. I can do that. The motion sounded like reallocate $15,000 for unrestricted use within the eviction prevention program for translation, one-on-one support, etc., and keep the $30,000 for specific legal costs.
That is the motion, yes.
Is there a second? Or we had a second?
Committee member
There was
Ramos.
a second, yeah.
I can do a roll call vote.
Great.
So let's begin with committee member Grunwald.
Aye.
Committee member Ramos.
Aye.
Committee member Pardo Dizella.
No.
Vice Chair Haynes Lipsey.
Aye.
Chair Allman.
Aye.
The motion carries 4 votes to 1.
Okay.
Wait, one.
Wait.
Remember,
Well-
I have a second motion.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right. Motion number 2.
Committee member Ramos has a hand.
Thank you. I wanted to make a motion to send a letter to the city asking for resources to be put into their multilingual outreach. You had the name here somewhere in a slide. Their multilingual translation programs for the city.
Multicultural engagement program.
So I would like the RHC. So I move that the RHC sends a letter to the City Council in support of increased resources to the multicultural engagement program, iterating how that will be helpful not only to our program here, but citywide. A nice letter, friendly letter.
I will second the friendly letter to the city council.
Andrea, do you want to take the roll?
Yeah. So we will begin with committee member Grunwald.
Maybe just a clarifying question for committee member Ramos. Would this just for the translation part, not necessarily, like, is it tied to any particular service, or is this?
No, this is it's just putting it on the council's radar that this is a need, essentially, that they expand the city's existing multicultural engagement program, which includes translation services, because the blessings kind of trickle down to us, essentially.
Sure.
So it's really a nice reminder showing how, if the city improves this one program, it will help us as well. So please improve this one program if you can.
Sure, and I'm not sure if you're open to the language there, but if if we can tap into that and actually pay on a per some sort of unit basis, right? So if we have an ask, or if we are sending people there to get translation or using those services, we could pay out of certain budget items for those translation services, similar to what I think we're trying to do here, but it would be more centralized, and I guess that might be more kind of efficient. Sorry, that was a long-winded.
Yeah, for clarification.
Yeah, let's get on their radar.
We already do that. So for clarification, we already do that.
But not for the helpline. That's just Project Sentinel. They're not tapping into anything from the city.
Well, they're
just translating it.
That's because that's one person on the telephone at one time. So that's a different program, the helpline, versus the eviction center.
Got it. And do we use that for our communications or our public or our mailers, the same service?
We use the city for that. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Well, so
no, my vote is aye on that.
Committee member.
You're withdrawing your amendment?
Yes.
What is the amendment?
It's been withdrawn.
Okay.
We'll continue with Committee Member Ramos.
Aye.
Committee Member Pardo Dizella.
No.
Vice Chair Haynes-Livesay.
Aye.
Chair Almond.
Aye.
Motion carries 4 votes to 1. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, committee members and staff. We will now move to committee staff announcements and updates. I will hand it back to staff for presentations.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Almond, and thank you, committee members. Item 9.1 is our quarterly more in-depth update of the monthly status report fiscal year to date numbers. So I'm going to go over these a little bit more in detail, and you'll see a few slight changes in formatting for a variety of reasons. We've broken down the public inquiries topics. We no longer have the COVID separate subset. We've combined them into one chart again. So you can see all the categories here. A lot of the calls coming into us and into the helpline are related to COVID-19 rent relief right now. And that is separate from the eviction protection calls that are coming in. So just a reminder, we do provide eviction protection support outside of COVID-19 related evictions, and we are still receiving inquiries and information necessary to implement the CSFRA as well. We've had 365 public inquiries made so far. That is a increase of more than 100 public inquiries from last year. And 61 of those have been for bilingual services, which again, compared to what we normally see, that's a 10% increase overall across all of our requests. For community workshops, we've held 9 so far, which is an increase of about 100% over where we were last year. And we've doubled the number of attendees. We've had 86 people join us for those so far this year. We've had 16 office hours with 107 attendees. And we've held 5 eviction help center clinics and pop-up events with 57 attendees. And you can see here with the outreach, we've included now the targeted letters that we're sending out to landlords and tenants when we receive eviction notices. So now when we receive eviction notices from landlords, we're sending out letters to both the tenant and the landlord, informing them of all of the support services that are available, including the state rent relief. Again, landlords are able to apply for that on behalf of their tenants if they're interested. And I would like to note that everyone who has come into the Eviction Help Center and answered the question as to whether or not their landlord has applied for relief on their behalf, they have all answered no. So we do want to note that we are trying to do an equitable outreach to both tenants and landlords here. We've also had a few postcards go out as well. We've had 6 email updates that have gone out through the month of September, and we have about 707 email subscribers, which is nearly double what we had last year. So far through the mediation program, we've received 30 requests for mediations and conciliations. 20 of them have been resolved and 9 are pending. You can see here some of the overview of the termination notices we've had and other notices that are required by our regulations. We've had 73 banked rent increase notices be filed with the city, and we've received 266 termination notices so far this fiscal year. There have been no requests for tenant buyouts and no requests for additional occupants through September. Additionally, this is a further breakdown of those eviction notices. We've had 15 withdrawal from markets. That's from a past project. And we've had a few, we've had 1 breach of lease at those at fault notices. Otherwise, everything else has been failure to pay rent notices. You can see we are kind of evening out and hopefully seeing, as Emily noted, a trickle that maybe we can catch as we continue to move forward in the fiscal year from our peak back in Q3 of 2021 of 272 notices. I do want to note that this isn't significantly different than what we've seen in the past for our trends for these type of notices. However, the reason for the notices are different this time around. We've had no properties go into redevelopment this year and have had no units affected. And we have had 29 households that have received assistance this calendar year. So again, this is through the calendar year for 2021. And those households that have received assistance are related to projects that went into redevelopment outside of the 2021 time period. For petitions, we have 2 that are in review, including a landlord petition for upward adjustment of rent for MNOI adjustment. And we have 1 tenant petition that was settled this month. For the market conditions, as you can see, things are starting to stabilize a little bit from the peak of instability due to COVID. We're starting to see the vacancy rate stabilize a little bit from what we had at the beginning of COVID. And we are flattening out to about 8% right now for fully covered units. We expect that to potentially go up in the next few months and then again flatten back out as the market recovers. For prices, the market is rebounding. We're almost back up to where we were pre-COVID for most units, including our fully covered units. So the biggest decline was actually for our newly built units in Mountain View, which are not in any way covered by the CSFRA. But even that has rebounded from its where it was at its lowest. And the average rent requested on the market right now for fully covered units is $2,523. And the sales data continues to be very stable for the city. We're not seeing a sharp decline or increase. There have been 6 properties that have transacted so far this fiscal year for a total of 39 units. And there are 7 properties that are on the market right now for a total of 105 units. So again, just not a lot of transactions in the sales market, and not a lot of, if any, transactions in the redevelopment market. Those are not happening currently and haven't for a little while. This concludes staff's presentation on the monthly status report, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time if you have them.
I'm seeing no questions from staff.
Okay. No questions from staff?
No, sorry, committee members.
Okay. Then I think we can proceed to upcoming monthly workshops and office hours, and then there'll be staff.
I think there is one hand for the public.
Oh, there is. Okay.
One second.
Go ahead.
1 second. Okay, Edie Keating, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Was happy to see the vacancy rate starting to come down on the staff report. And there's one number that I would love to be having reported that is, as far as I can see, not in the current status report. And that's the % of registered units. So I'd also love to see ongoingly the number of covered units. That doesn't change very often, but decreased a little bit over the past month or so. But especially, I think it will be very useful to have all units registered as is required, and I'd like to see our progress towards that. And whether that will be monthly, quarterly, not that important, but to start seeing that progress would be a good reminder. And one time when it came up recently that I wish I knew or felt we had all registered units was when they were at the city council meeting, questions about Airbnb units. And so there'd just be a lot of value in getting all the units registered. Thank you.
Okay, were there any more questions from the public?
No more questions from the public, but I do see a hand by committee member Ramos.
Okay, we are at that point, so go ahead.
As in, go ahead, me? Hello?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was on mute.
So some questions with the report. Yes, the question asked by the attendee, Edie, about including how many units have been registered in our rent registry would be helpful. If it's too difficult, don't worry about it. I'm looking at staff to see if I'm pushing too far. I really don't want to make things,
That should be easy.
Okay, I really I don't want to make things any more difficult for y'all. But I would love to get that kind of information as well. I would also love to get information including the report. I really liked the highlights that we got from item 8.4 about who we were serving, what percentages were in other languages. I would love to have something similar in the monthly report if it's possible. If it's too much, don't worry about it. But I would love to have that information, especially as we are looking at the end of the eviction moratorium and dealing with those types of evictions.
We have that data for the Eviction Help Center and the people that we're serving through that. We don't gather that data for in general when we're getting phone calls into our program. I think the helpline does gather some of that information for cases that they're actually working on, and we can see more about that as well. But for our general day-to-day, that would be far more challenging for us. Staff is happy to provide a monthly update on the Eviction Help Center as well, kind of as we were doing for the COVID outreach. We were providing that every few months, but we can definitely draft something up and make that something that's doable for monthly updates.
If it's not too much trouble, would love that. I also want to see my fellow committee members, if that is also okay with you all, to get that data.
It was something that we were planning on providing, and are happy to do so.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments from committee members?
Seeing no other hands.
Okay. I believe that does it. Is there more in the
one more agenda?
Oh, yes, there is. Yes. Go ahead.
Am I doing this? Okay. Upcoming events. So we'll just highlight sort of some things that are the Run Stabilization staff are holding. So the Eviction Help Center, of course, every Thursday. It is every Thursday. These are just the next two dates. Are again at the public library in Mountain View on the second floor in the program room. They are held between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And there, of course, we help with the rent relief applications, understanding the eviction notices and lawyer referrals. We also are having some webinars that are upcoming. So Tuesday, next Tuesday, I believe, not this Tuesday, October 26th at 3 p.m., we're having a landlord-focused webinar where we'll be discussing eviction basics and rent relief. On the same topic, we are having a tenant-focused webinar the next day, Wednesday, October 27th, and that will be held at 6:30 p.m. And again, our tenant webinars are bilingual in both English and Spanish. We also have the walk-in office hours. We're now holding these in person, and there are Zoom appointments available as well. And so whichever the community feels best suits their needs, they can join us in person or over the computer. And these are, again, for every topic about rent stabilization. It's not just focused on the Eviction Help Center topics. And these are every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that concludes agenda item 9.2. Any questions?
Are there any questions, comments at this point?
Seeing no hands at this time.
Okay, that brings us to adjournment. I want to thank everyone for their patience and their conscientious input on every item. The meeting is adjourned at 10:34 p.m. The next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on November 15th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Good night.